Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear audiences, thank you for joining us today to discuss one of the most pressing issues that is shaking the convenience of the entire world, people, leaders, and activists. As we speak now, every continent on this planet is dealing with the consequences of flash floods, counting hundreds of deaths and multiple thousands of displaced families from Myanmar, South Sudan, Germany, and all the way through towards Texas. Over the past months, severe wildfires degraded forests, habitats, and affected entire communities, from Siberia to Athens to California. We are at an alarming state at which climate change is no longer a slogan, an occasional pop-up on the news, or a side file on the desk of a decision maker. Climate change is inevitable. It is now recognized as a global threat to the entire humanity. The latest report on climate change released by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change last month warns of projected increase in long-term average temperatures to over 7 Celsius degrees in the Middle East and North Africa. The likelihood of extreme droughts is increasing by 200 to 300% in the Mediterranean. And to quote the report precisely, the total land area subject to increasing drought frequency and severity will expand with high confidence, and in the Mediterranean future, aridification will far exceed the magnitude of change seen in the last millennium. We see that basically groundwater depletion is also going to hit the region in Central Middle East regions and North Africa. We will see frequency in intense and heavy rainfalls in the Mediterranean Sea, and which will lead to also flash floods and increased risks on communities. Evidently, as science speaks, media and attention unfortunately does not pick up until we are showered with disasters and threats across the board. As attention grows to these issues, particularly with the context of regional security and geopolitical tensions, it is now quite inevitable to discuss climate change within the geopolitical context in the Middle East. EcoPeace Middle East is delighted to present this unique discussion featuring the New York Times Global Affairs columnist, Mr. Thomas Friedman, with a joint discussion with our Israeli co-director, Mr. Gidon Bromberg. And this event will discuss the climate crisis facing the Middle East, considering the latest IPCC report, and within the context of the new US leadership on fighting climate change and towards the new Biden's administration policies towards the Middle East. This event is organized in collaboration with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and EcoPeace under an ongoing program of the Regional Leadership Forum. This is a cross-border network of about 40 young leaders who are sharing the space of discussion and meeting and networking and creating a network to discuss entrepreneurship and regional initiatives on climate change, energy and economic development, and water and environment within the context of regional cooperation. Of course, this is a regional forum from activists from Palestine, Israel, and Jordan, as we focus as an organization over the past 26 years on this region throughout a strategy of a bottom-up approach to connect communities and activists and the bottom-up approach, but also to advocate for larger concepts and projects, which Gidon will speak about in a few, and of course, engaging at the diplomatic level and advocacy level with our decision makers in the region. I will leave you in peace and in the good hands of my colleague, Gidon Bromberg, with an exciting discussion with Mr. Thomas Friedman. Please enjoy the upcoming hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nada, for that very, very kind introduction. My name is Gidon Bromberg, and I'm the Israeli co-director of EcoPeace. And on behalf, and together with Nada, Majdalani, the Palestinian director, Yana Abu Taleb, EcoPeace's Jordanian director. I'm delighted to moderate our discussion today with our very, very special guest speaker, Mr. Thomas Friedman. Thomas Friedman is an internationally acclaimed and leading American political commentator and author. He's a three-time Pulitzer Prize winner and is a weekly columnist for the New York Times. He writes extensively on foreign affairs, the Middle East, globalization, and environment climate issues. I can therefore not imagine a more appropriate person to speak to the title of our discussion today, A Climate Ripe for Change. Can the Middle East survive the climate crisis without an overhaul of the geopolitical climate? Let me first further delve into the topic for discussion by highlighting that there are very few climate skeptics in the Middle East. As Nada mentioned, this is because the climate crisis is already hitting the Middle East hard with unbearable temperatures, increased water scarcity, and desertification threatening livelihoods and making life increasingly unbearable to be outside in the sun during the long summer months. Since the 1950s, we've already witnessed an increase in temperatures along the Eastern Mediterranean of over 2 degrees Celsius. And the climate models are warning of an additional 4-degree increase by the end of the century, with some areas in the MENA region, as Nada mentioned, further forecasting a 7-degree average increase in temperatures. The climate models warn of a 40% decrease in rainfall by the end of the century. And when it does rain, it will pour, leading to potentially deadly and damaging flood events, as we've already witnessed in recent winters. Given the pre-existing political instability and high level of conflict that already exists in our region, it's easy to see why the climate crisis is often described as a threat multiplier, potentially leading to even further conflict and failed states in our region. This is indeed why at EcoPeace, we authored a report and launched the call for a green-blue deal for the Middle East. Our call is inspired by the efforts made by the European Union and the Biden administration to fight climate change. We believe that the common threat faced by all of our peoples and countries must be a wake-up call to create new political will for cooperation, both as a means to keep alive the two-state solution and as a means to keep alive the two-state solution between Israelis and Palestinians. But more about the green-blue deal perhaps later. So let me now turn to Tom Friedman to give, for Tom to give his assessment on whether the Biden administration's policies towards the Middle East and US leadership on the fight on climate change are aligned and sufficient to help avoid further instability and nation-state collapse in our region. Following Tom's assessment, we'll take questions from the audience. Tom will have to leave us promptly at 5 Jerusalem time, but those interested for continued discussion can stay on the call for an additional 15 minutes to discuss with Nada and myself. Tom, with much gratitude, can I first of all ask you perhaps to speak to your assessment of the Biden administration's policies towards the Middle East, and then perhaps a follow-up on its alignment with the climate crisis.
Well, Gideon, thank you. It's great to be with you. Nada, thank you for your introduction. It's no secret I've been a longtime fan of EcoPeace, which I've tried to express by doing the greatest thing I can do, which is write about you and your important mission. You know, if I were to break out, Gideon, Biden administration position on sort of the Middle East, the traditional issues of Israeli-Palestinian conflict and peacemaking, I don't think they've fully formed their ideas yet. We still don't even have a new ambassador in Israel. Fortunately, they have a great acting ambassador, but there's still so much of the diplomatic infrastructure that hasn't even been put in place. And so it makes your mission at EcoPeace right now even more important, because it's a plastic moment. And I think you can get in there with your ideas. And one thing I'm sure about, this administration would like to find fresh ideas, fresh approaches, not as an alternative to a two-state solution, but actually to propel one and give it new energy. So I really think what you're doing right now is very, very important, because I think they're really in a very sort of, it's not confused, but a very plastic moment, because the focus has been on getting out of Afghanistan. And I think there's therefore a real eagerness for a positive message, one that conveys that we are not getting out of the Middle East. Sorry, we are just going to engage there in a different way, and in a more creative way. And so this meeting that you're organizing now and your report on the Green Blue Deal, I think, is very timely, and I'd urge you to really push it forward. In terms of the broader sort of perception of where EcoPeace fits in right now, let me tell you how I really see this moment. So, so I'm working on a new book on this subject. So what I see going on is I look at history in terms of Promethean moments, big moments of technological change that actually change everything. That's how we sort of propel our civilization forward. So the first Promethean moment was the printing press, obviously. The second was the scientific revolution. The third was the agricultural revolution. Fourth is the industrial revolution. And the one we're going through right now, it doesn't quite have a name yet, is what we're all sort of living with. And what I've actually been describing in my books, I've written 7 books, but I've really just written 1 book. They're all about kind of this moment. It's like a giant elephant I've been describing, once from the ear, once from the nose, once from the tail, once from the foot. And so what are we in the middle of, Gita? We're in the middle of the most unusual hinge of history, where machines are now driving humans. Humans are now driving nature, and humans are connecting with other humans at a level of intimacy that we've simply never seen before through migration and telecommunication. We can literally hear each other's breath. And the challenge of government today is to find a politics that can get the best out of this incredible moment where machines are driving humans, humans are driving nature, and humans are interconnecting with other humans at a level of intimacy we've never seen before. They can get the best out of it and to cushion the worst. That's really our challenge on all these things. How do we get the best out of this moment and cushion the worst? And your report even alluded to that kind of language. You talk about how do we make climate a win, okay? Not just a patch on a wound. Okay? And so one of my sort of fundamental rules about this moment, then again, let me just step back again. So when we move into this Promethean moment, where machines are driving humans, humans are driving nature, and humans are interconnecting with other humans, what it's doing, it's actually blowing up traditional left-right politics. So let me explain. When the Industrial Revolution happened, it was enormously destabilizing. And it took us about 100 years to figure out how to stabilize it. And what we came up with was something we called the welfare state. Had a Chinese version, an Indian version, Russian version, Eastern European version, Western European version, and an American version, New Deal version. Your report even echoes. And what this welfare state did was it created a set of walls, ceilings, and floors to actually cushion people through the Industrial Revolution. It had no environmental, really, component. And left-right politics became a debate about how high the walls should be. Left said, let's have high walls of protection. Right said, low walls. How thick the floor should be. Left said, thick safety net. Right said, thin safety net. And how tight the ceiling should be. The ceiling was the ceiling on the pace of change and incomes. Right said no ceiling, left said tight ceiling. And for 75 years, that was left-right politics. In Israel, in its own way, in the Arab world, in Europe, that was left-right politics. And then suddenly, Guido, and you may have noticed, every political party in the industrial world basically blew up. The Tories became a Brexit party. The Liberals disappeared. The Labour became a Marxist. The Republicans became a Trump cult. The Democrats are still sorting themselves out. I have no clue who governs Italy today. France is the only country in the world that has a president without a party and an opposition without a leader. And Israel, of course, is exhibit A of a country whose complete political system is completely blown up, left, right, and now has this coalition. So what is that about? Why did that happen? Basically, because we got this incredible acceleration in technology, this incredible acceleration in globalization, and incredible acceleration in climate change, all at the same time. And they created a release of energy that blew off the ceiling, blew away the walls, and crashed through the floor. And the world suddenly became incredibly fast, incredibly fused by telecommunication and climate. Last time I checked, Mother Nature didn't know there was a border between Palestine and Israel or Jordan and Palestine. We became fused. Technology started to go really deep into us, so deep that we had to add the adjective deep to everything. Oh, that's not just a fake, that's deep fake. Oh, that's not just medicine, that's deep medicine. And incredibly open, everybody could play. So now the challenge of politics is how do you actually govern a world that is fast, fused, deep, and open? And that brings me to EcoPeace. Because the only, when I look at the world, so I study nature a lot, not just for nature's purposes, but what we can learn from nature about how we govern a much more globalized world. Because the only thing that is as complex as this globalized world we created are natural systems. And what is the fundamental lesson of nature about managing complexity, managing an ecosystem? We're an ecosystem, and which ecosystems thrive when the climate changes? Those that create complex adaptive networks. And nature does it naturally, okay, from the bottom up through actually a struggle for survival. But a healthy, stable ecosystem is one that has a complex adaptive network where all the elements of the ecosystem network together unconsciously to produce incredible resilience and propulsion because they have healthy interdependencies. And I simply translate now that to EcoPeace and human communities. Which human communities are going to thrive and survive when we get this climate change in the climate change in technology, and climate change in globalization? It's the one that produces complex adaptive coalitions. Complex adaptive coalitions. Only a complex adaptive coalition can manage a world that's fast, fused, and deep. And EcoPeace itself is a complex adaptive coalition. And what you are proposing through your Green Blue Deal is the mother of all complex adaptive coalitions to manage a Middle East that is getting incredibly hot, flat, and crowded, basically. And the only way your individual countries and collectively you're going to be able to manage this challenge in such a fast, fused, and deep world is if you have a complex adaptive coalition where you maximize your resilience as a region and your propulsion, your ability to go forward. And so I think that's how I locate you in my kind of worldview. Now, what happens if you don't do this? Okay, well, let me I'll lay it out to you. As I see it, the 50 years, well, let's really widen the aperture. You know, for millennia, the world was actually governed by empires, and certainly the Middle East, you know, the Byzantines, the Ottomans, the Romans, you know, the British, we governed by empires. And the world was basically empires and open regions, ungoverned regions, but those ungoverned regions really couldn't threaten you if you were the empire, living in the empire. And then on came World War I, World War II, decolonization, and we divided the world up into, in 1945 at the UN, 195 nation states. And the 50 years after World War II, they were a wonderful time to be a small nation state. Okay. First of all, there are two superpowers out there throwing money at you, educating your kids at Patrice Lumumba University of Moscow or Ohio State in America, giving you wheat. You could be, frankly, Syria and lose 3 wars to Israel and get your army rebuilt for free all 3 times. And lots of foreign aid, etc. Number 1. 2, climate change was very moderate. 3, populations were actually relatively small. And 4, China was not in the World Trade Organization, so everybody could be in the low-wage industry business. And 5, no one had one of these little things to compare themselves or their leader to the valley or village or country or continent next door. Now, my argument is all that flips when we enter this new Promethean era. And what happens now is, with these accelerations in climate change, technology, and globalization, what happens now is, and you just saw this in living color with America and Afghanistan, no one wants to touch you now. No superpower wants to touch you because they think all they win is a bill. So they're not out there throwing their aid money around anymore, number 1. Number 2, climate change is now hammering these countries. And in the Middle East in particular, I mean, I wrote about Senegal a few years ago. Senegal's already at 2 degrees rise average temperature, okay? They're already where we're trying to prevent by the year 2100. Populations have exploded. Iran population, 1979, year of the revolution, around 40 million. Today, 85 million. And everyone's got one of these now to compare themselves with the country or leader next door. And oh my, mine now even has a human trafficking app on it. And lastly, China's in the World Trade Organization. So nobody can be in the textile business. Metaphorically, low-wage industries are not so available anymore. I was in Egypt, for the Tahrir Square revolution, and I was there for 3 weeks. I was away from my wife. And the day I left, I went to Cairo airport. I went to the Treasures of Egypt souvenir shop to buy my honey, something to remind her where her honey was for 3 weeks. Well, what do they have there? Let's see, they've got pyramid ashtrays. No, my honey doesn't smoke. Sphinx bookends. My honey has plenty of bookends. Oh, what's this I found on the table? It was a stuffed camel. And if you squeezed its hump, it honked. And my honey did not have a honking humped camel. So I picked it up to buy it, took it to the cash register, turned it over, and what did it say on the bottom? Say it with me now, made in China. Yeah, you're now the lowest wage country in the Eastern Mediterranean, but there's now a country half a world away that can make your honking humped camel cheaper than you can and ship it half a world away. So what's happening is, for all of these small states now that were born, in the last century, they're under enormous stress. They're under enormous stress from all these new factors. And some of them, tragically, are just fracturing and blowing up. In the hemisphere I live in, it's El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. And we've seen the effects on immigration as a result of that. And I don't have to tell you about the Middle East. I mean, you've got now vast ungoverned zones in Libya, Yemen, parts of Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. And there's no superpower who's going to come in now and order that, whether that's good or bad, but they're not going to do that. And a lot of these places have failed at self-government. So we've actually never been here before, where there's no outside power that's going to come in, but these countries have also failed at producing complex adaptive coalitions to govern themselves now. And so they've collapsed into really tribalism in places like Yemen or Libya in particular. And you've got this vast ungoverned space. But unlike in millennia before, in centuries before, you can now, there's a guy in Tripoli, Libya today with a computer who may be running a ransomware attack, against my newspaper this afternoon. So the two giant ungoverned spaces out there, one's called the world of disorder and the other is called cyberspace. They start to merge together. So all of this, takes us back to the climate issue. And to me, and where you get this merger, because to me, the beauty of the Green Blue Deal is it talks about not only giving us a framework for adaptation as a complex adaptive coalition. But it both brings and requires governance that will help stabilize every partner in this deal, from the Palestinian government, the Jordanian government, to the Israeli government. So that's how I locate you. I know that was a long-winded answer, but I wanted you to know how I look at things, and that's how I see it.
Thank you, Tom. That is indeed very deep and very descriptive of the objectives of the Green-Blue deal. In an earlier op-ed, in a recent op-ed, you had written that while the Biden administration might not want to engage so much with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict very much wants to engage with the Biden administration. So what does that mean in these circumstances? How long can the Biden administration wait before engaging? And what are the ramifications of ignoring the crisis that the Middle East is in?
Well, they could wait a long time, Gita, if I'm honest. Right now, my own personal focus is just to preserve the possibility of a two-state solution. I just want to preserve that at a time when the balance of forces is actually to erase it. There are a lot of forces that by default or design, just want to erase the two-state solution. And it will, it will, that trend or that hope will meet reality, and the reality will be very destabilizing. I don't want to get into the details of what that should be, and it's complicated or whatnot, but one of the biggest problems we have right now in America, and it's true of all democracies around the world now, is this rising trend of tribalism. Our politics has gotten increasingly tribal. It's the only way I can describe it. So it isn't two parties dealing with each other as equal citizens, but it's more like two tribes now. And our politics is a lot more like the Middle East. It's rule or die. And so Biden right now is just focused on trying to salvage, his administration and get through some of the basic big-scale legislation he's trying to get through. And I don't know whether the Middle East is number 20 on his list or number 50, but it's not in the top 10. He got out of Afghanistan to think less about this region than more. And so you're home alone more than I would say as any time that I can recall in recent years. You're really home alone. That can be a bad thing. It can also be a good thing. The Middle East sometimes is a crutch, and the Americans are a crutch sometimes, that prevent people from doing the hard thinking and the hard compromising, that's going to be required. I have a motto about the Middle East. The Middle East only puts a smile on your face when it starts with them, with people in the Middle East. That was true of Camp David. It was true of Oslo. The good things only happen when it starts in the region, and we can be amplifiers. We can provide the catering, but the truly sustainable things start in the region, not with outside powers. And so I would keep that in mind as you form your own sort of agenda to advance your program.
Absolutely. I think we couldn't agree with you more. At EcoPeace, we completely believe that it's local leadership that we need to empower. It's local leadership that we need to invest in and create capacity, because it's only local leadership that is going to bring the change that's needed. Nevertheless, there is room and there is importance for international support for local leadership to move forward. And given that today, we're 20 years since the signing of the Oslo Accords, one of the principles of the Oslo Accords that we've identified at EcoPeace, and not only at EcoPeace, at other institutions as well, is that one of the premises of the Oslo Accords is either we agree on all final status issues Jerusalem settlements, borders, refugees, and water, or we don't move forward on anything. It's an all or nothing paradigm. At EcoPeace, we think that 25 years, of that paradigm has failed us. And we think that we should move forward on what is possible. Do you see an opening in this Biden administration for a change in that mindset? Do you see an opening?
I do, and one thing I'm sure of that Prime Minister Bennett, President Abbas, and King Abdullah of Jordan, they all want to win right now. They all want something that shows that they can move the process forward in a way that's relevant to improving the lives of their people, without incurring the huge political costs of a massive compromise, which is not likely, anywhere. And I think your agenda, Bennett's looking for something that will differentiate him from Bibi, an approach. Abu Mazen, I think, these are his, final years of rule. He should live a long life, but he's not immortal like anybody. So he's got to look for a win too. And I certainly know that King Abdullah would like it. And so starting with this agenda that you've laid out with EcoPeace, I would think would be very tempting if somebody could actually get them to focus on it. Why this is real, why it's tempting, and be relevant to the next generation, not as a substitute for a two-state solution, but actually, we're not going to get from where we are to a two-state solution in one leap. It's just not going to happen. There's too little trust between the parties. But this, to me, is a way to go forward. So I would urge you to frame it that way.
So Tom, one of the ways that indeed we're framing the issue is we're highlighting that the climate crisis, in fact, can be an opportunity for both advancing climate resilience and peace building. And to your earlier statements of creating healthy interdependencies, we look to the arrangements made after World War II on coal and steel as the two most important natural resources of the European continent at that time. And we've tried to draw the lessons of coal and steel to understand, well, what are the two critical resources, natural resources of the Levant that we can today capitalize to also create healthy interdependencies. And we've identified that as harnessing the sun through producing renewable energy, particularly in Jordan, because of its vast desert areas, and then harnessing the sea through desalination, both on the Israeli coast and on the Palestinian Gaza coast, as a means to meet the climate adaptation challenge of increased water insecurity in our region. Now, John Kerry was, the last American official to really try to move forward on a two-state solution. How might you see John Kerry approaching such an opportunity to not only move forward on as an example of climate adaptation and mitigation, but as a means to promote stability, particularly between Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians? And when I think of it, this type of healthy interdependency, isn't that exactly what's needed in the broader Middle East? Can't we have more in common between our countries by trying to achieve climate resilience, be it with the crisis of electricity of Lebanon, the crisis of water and electricity in Syria and in Iraq, as just two examples?
Well, it requires a complete reframing and mind shift, and you guys are agents of that in the very best sense and an engine for it. And I think we're in that transition. I'll tell you a funny thing it wasn't funny, but it was interesting thing for me in terms of my own rethinking of this. 2 years ago, the Trump administration assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the leader of the Revolutionary Guards. Now, let me make clear, I'm not for assassinating anybody. You know, I happened to be in New Zealand on vacation when that happened. And the Times called me and said, you got to write a column about this. I said, guys, I'm in New Zealand. I'm on vacation. Really, I'm so far away, I don't really know what's going on. But then I slept on it. I got up the next morning. I opened my computer and I wrote a sentence. I don't know where it came from. But I wrote a sentence that said, America just assassinated the dumbest man in Iran. I looked, why did I write that? Because I was saying, I am not going to judge you, Qasem Soleimani, in the old way, that what you did to Americans, that's in war. What we did to you, what you did to us, that's in war. I'm going to judge you in terms of your own people and their predicament right now. And Iran faces its largest lake, Lake Urmia, has basically dried up. It has a massive population explosion. It faces a huge climate crisis. It has millions of young people who are frustrated that they cannot realize their full potential. And what was your business model? Your business model was basically to hire, Arab Shia to kill Arab Sunnis in 4 Arab states around you, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, make them into failed states that would be dependent on you. That's just so stupid, given where Iran is right now and what its real needs are and what the real needs and aspirations of its people. So I completely, by the way, I heard from Iranians all of the, I got as much reaction to that column as from anywhere because they understood what I said. I'm not playing the old game right now. He was a genius military strategist. He was an evil guy who killed Americans. It's an old game. It's not relevant to this world anymore. And it was my declaration of independence. A lot of people got it, of just completely reframing the issue, from good and evil to no, wise or reckless in the face of what is the real challenge for your people right now and the real challenge for your neighbors. And if people aren't onto that agenda, whether they're Americans, Israelis, Arabs, or Persians, they're stupid in my view. That's the first thing I want to say about them, because they aren't seeing the real threats to their people. Mother Nature is going to kill them all long before they kill each other, and in a much crueler and more efficient way. And so it really requires this mind shift. I personally have made it, and I'm trying to use my column to drag other people along. You guys have made it. But a lot of other people haven't, and they're caught in their politics. And how can Bennett do that? Because what will, this one say, and what will that one say? And, folks, Mother Nature, if we haven't learned this from the pandemic, let me put it to you in simple English. Mother Nature is just chemistry, biology, and physics. That's all she is. You can't talk her up, you can't talk her down. You can't say, Mother Nature, we've got a very frail coalition. Could you back off a little bit? No, she's going to do whatever chemistry, biology, and physics dictate. And she always bats last. And she always bats 1,000. Do not mess with Mother Nature. And that's what we're doing. We don't realize we're all up against an inexorable force. And the whole COVID pandemic was a message to that. It was one of Mother Nature's fastballs. She throws these fastballs at us, to put it in American baseball terms, to sort out who is the fittest. Now, a virus is actually a living organism, but never mind. When it hits humans, it's a fastball. And she basically says, who's going to be the fittest here? And she really asks you just 3 questions. One is, do you respect my virus? Do you respect my virus or my hurricanes or my torrential downpours? Because if you don't, they will hurt you or someone you love. Number 2, have you based your response to my virus, my hurricanes, my downpours on chemistry, biology, and physics? On chemistry, biology, and physics, or on politics or an election calendar? Because if it's the latter, I will hurt you or someone you love. And the last thing she says is, are you coordinated? Are you coordinated? Because I evolved my virus or my hurricane, okay, over millennia to find any weakness in your immune system. So unless you're as coordinated as I am, and I don't see the border between Palestine and Israel, Jordan and Israel, Jordan and Syria, or Iran and Saudi Arabia. So are you coordinated? Because I am. I evolved my virus to find any weakness in your immune system. And if you're not coordinated, I will hurt you or someone you love. Now, we're either going to learn that the hard way or the easy way, early or late. But that is the reality that we're up against. So when we come at Mother Nature and say, the political coalition, the system, I mean, she is truly not interested. She is not listening. And so that's, unless we come to grips with that and build a politics around it. And it's really hard because our politics is actually, speaking of America, it's going the completely wrong way. We're moving from complex adaptive political systems actually back to much more tribal system of rule or die, you know what I mean? And it's happening in America, it's happening all over the world. And so this is my stockbroker sometimes jokes that on bad days in the market, he says, I picked a really bad day to stop sniffing glue, okay? He jokes with me. And I would say to you, we picked a really bad time to go tribal when precisely what we need is just the opposite of complex adaptive coalition.